So I accidentally closed out of this window when I was switching between windows, and I lost this entire speech. Most of it, I had said some other things, but most of it was just Father David Rice, his speech in 1792 at the Constitutional Convention. So Kentucky wanted to become a state. 1792, they had about 10 conventions in Danville, Kentucky. Father David Rice goes to Danville to make his plea to make Kentucky anti-slavery. Do not bring, you know, the fucking bullshit from Virginia into Kentucky. And since it's the birth of a state, then you can just wash your hands of the evil altogether instead of perpetuating in something that some future legislature will have to deal with later on, which, you know, is absolutely true. It become way bloodier, and it was really bad. Though Howard Zinn said all of Western hemisphere, North and South America, had got rid of slavery without going through a civil war. So perhaps bloodshed wasn't necessary in order for slavery to. But there's a Haiti Revolution, so maybe Howard Zinn wasn't 100% right on that. So the Father David Rice is a Presbyterian minister. He'd actually got ran out of Virginia. He had established a school there. Then he established Transylvania University. That's Father David Rice established Transylvania University, and he also come to this convention and he give this plea. And so on the online Library of Liberty, a project of Liberty Fund Incorporated, oll.libertyfund.org. David Rice, 1733 to 1816. Slavery inconsistent with justice and good policy. So he was able to say this long-ass speech, which is like an hour, 2 hours long, which I'm only going to read a couple of the first beginning paragraphs, and then I'm going to read the end. And it might take up the whole time. If not, I have other things. We need to talk about the history of the different constitutions and what each one of them actually meant and what were the struggles that each one of them had to go through, so that way it gives us an idea of the struggles that the current Constitution, the current Constitutional Convention would be. So the 2014 Constitutional Convention on January 1st or June 1st, we don't know how that's going to turn out. So in order to see from the past, we could see, you know, what the present's going to be like. And we don't want to repeat the, you know, the mistakes of the past, right? So, Mr. Chairman, I rise, sir, in support of the motion now before you, but my reverence for this body, the novelty of my present situation, the great importance and difficulty of the subject, and the thought of being opposed by gentlemen of the greatest abilities has too sensible an impression on my mind. But, sir, I know so much of my natural timidity, which increases with my years, that I foresaw this would be the case. I therefore prepared a speech for the occasion. Sir, I have lived free and in many respects happy for nearly 60 years, but my happiness has been greatly diminished for much of my time by hearing a great part of the human species groaning under the galling yoke of bondage. In this time I've lost a venerable father, a tender mother, 2 affectionate sisters, and a beloved firstborn son. But all these together have not cost me half the anxiety as had been occasioned by this wretched situation of my fellow men, whom without a blush I call my brethren. When I consider their deplorable state, and who are the cause of their misery, the load of misery that lies on them, and the load of guilt on us for imposing it on them, it fills my soul with anguish. I view their distresses, I read the anger of heaven. I believe that if I should not exert myself when and as far as in my power in order to relieve them, I should be partaker of the guilt. So the question is whether slavery is consistent with justice and good policy. But before this is answered, it may be necessary to inquire what a slave is. A slave is a human creature made by law the property of another human creature, and reduced by mere power to an absolute unconditional subjection to his will. This definition will be allowed to be just, with only one exception, that the law does not leave the life and the limbs of the slave entirely in the master's power, and from it may be inferred several melancholy truths which will include a sufficient answer to the main question. In order to a right view of this subject, I would observe that there are some cases where a man may justly be made a slave by law. By vicious conduct he may forfeit his freedom, he may forfeit his life. Where this is the case, the safety of the public may be secured by reducing the offender to a state of slavery. It would be right. It may be an act of kindness. In no other case, if my conceptions are just, can it be vindicated on principles of justice or humanity. As creatures of God, we are, with respect to liberty, all equal. If one has a right to live among his fellow creatures and enjoy his freedom, so has another. If one has a right to enjoy that property he acquires by an honest industry, so has another. If I by force take that from another, which he has a just right to according to the law of nature, which is a divine law, which he has never forfeited, and to which he has never relinquished his claim, I am certainly guilty of injustice and robbery. And when the thing taken is the man's liberty, when it is himself, it is the greatest injustice. I injure him much more than if I robbed him of his property on the highway. In this case, it does not belong to him to prove a negative, but to me to prove that such forfeiture has been made, because if it has not, he is certainly still the proprietor. All he has to do is to shew the insufficiency of my proofs. A slave claims his freedoms. He pleads that he is a man, that he was by nature free, that he had not forfeited his freedom nor relinquished it. Now, unless his master can prove that he is not a man, that he was not born free, or that he has forfeited or relinquished his freedom, he must be judged free. The justice of his claim must be acknowledged. His being long deprived of this right by force or fraud does not annihilate it. It remains. It is still his right. When I rob a man of his property, I leave him his liberty in the capacity of acquiring and possessing more property. But when I deprive him of his liberty, I also deprive him of his capacity. Therefore, I do him greater injury when I deprive him of his liberty than when I rob him of his property. It is in vain for me to plead that I had the sanction of law, for this makes the injury the greater. It arms the community against him and makes his case desperate. If my definition of a slave is true, he is a rational creature reduced by the power of legislation to the state of a brute, and thereby deprived of every privilege of humanity, except as above, that he may minister to the ease, luxury, lust, pride, or greed of another, no better than himself. We only want a law enacted that no owner of a brute, no other person, should kill or dismember it. And then in law, the case of a slave and a brute is in most respects parallel, and where they differ, the state of the brute is to be preferred. The brute may steal or rob to supply his hunger. The law does not condemn him to die for his offense, and only permits his death. But the slave, though in the most starving condition, dare not do either on penalty of death or some severe punishment. Is there any need of arguments to prove that it is in a high degree unjust and cruel to reduce one human creature to such an abject, wretched state as this, that he may minister to the ease, luxury, and greed of another? Has not the other the same right to have him reduced to this state, that he may minister to his interest or pleasure? On what is this right founded? Whence was it derived? Did it come from heaven, from earth, or from hell? Has the great King of heaven, the absolute sovereign disposer of all men, given this extraordinary right to white men over black men? Where's the charter? In whose hands is it lodged? Let it be produced and read, that we may know our privilege. Thus reducing men is an indignity, a degradation to our own nature. Had we not lost a true sense of its worth and dignity, we should blush to see it converted into brutes. We should blush to see our houses filled or surrounded with cattle in our own shapes. We should look upon it to be a fouler or blacker stain than that with which the vertical suns have tinged the blood of Africa. When we plead for slavery, we plead for the disgrace and ruin of our own nature. If we are capable of it, we may ever after claim kindred with the brutes and renounce our own superior dignity. From our definition, it will appear that a slave is a creature made after the image of God and accountable to him for the maintenance of innocent purity, but by law reduced to a liableness to be debauched by men without any prospect or hope of redress. That a slave is made after the image of God, no Christian will deny that a slave is absolutely subjected to be debauched by men. It is so apparent from the nature of slavery that it needs no proof. This is evidently the unhappy case of female slaves, a number of whom have been remarkable for their chastity and modesty. If their master attempts their chastity, they dare neither resist nor complain. If another man should make the attempt, their resistance may not be so dangerous. Complaints are equally vain. They cannot be heard in their own defense. Their testimony cannot be admitted. The injurious person has a right to be heard, may accuse the innocent sufferer of malicious slander and have her severely chastised. The virtuous woman and virtuous Africans, no doubt there are, esteemed her chastity above everything else, and some have preferred it even to their lives. Then forcibly to deprive her of this is treating her with the greatest injustice. Therefore, since law leaves the chastity of a female slave entirely in the power of her master and greatly in the power of others, it permits this injustice. It provides no remedy. It refuses to redress this insufferable grievance. It denies even the small privilege of complaining. From our definition, it will follow that a slave is a free moral agent, legally deprived of free agency and obliged to act according to the will of another free agent of the same species, and yet he is accountable to his creator for the use he makes of his own free agency. When a man, though he can exist independent of another, cannot act independent of him, his agency must depend upon the will of that other, and therefore he is deprived of his own free agency. And yet, as a free agent, he is accountable to his maker for all the deeds done in the body. This comes to pass through a great omission and inconsistency in the legislature. They ought further to have enacted, in order to have been consistent, that the slave should not have been accountable for any of his actions, that his master should have answered for him in all things here and the hereafter. That a slave has the capacities of free moral agent will be allowed at all. That he is in many instances deprived by law of this exercise of these powers evidently appears from his situation. That he is accountable to his maker for his conduct will be allowed by those who do not believe that human legislatures are omnipotent and can free men from this allegiance and subjection to the King of Heaven. The principles of conjugal love and fidelity in the breast of a virtuous pair, of natural affection in parents and a sense of duty in children, are inscribed there by the finger of God. They are the laws of heaven, but in enslaving law directly opposes them and virtually forbids obedience. The relation of husband and wife or parent and child are formed by divine authority, and they're founded on the laws of nature, but it is in the power of a cruel master and often of a needy creditor to break these tender connections and forever to separate these dearest relatives. This is ever done, in fact, at the call of interest or humor. The poor sufferers may expostulate, they may plead with tears, their hearts may break, but all in vain. The laws of nature are violated, the tender ties are dissolved, the final separation takes place, and the duties of these relations can no longer be performed, nor their comforts enjoyed. Would these slaves perform the duties of husbands and wives, parents and children, the law disables them. It puts it altogether out of their power. So it goes on for a good bit. I'll start up here, and that should be: they will not suffer my children to live in ease and luxury at the expense of poor Africans. They have resolved, and alas, the resolution must stand forever, that black men in the next generation shall enjoy a fruit of their own labor as well as white men, and be happy according to the merit of their own conduct. If justice is done to the offspring of Negroes, mine are eternally ruined. If my children cannot, as I have done, live in injustice and cruelty, they are injured, they are robbed, they are undone. What? Must young master saddle his own horse? Must pretty little miss sweep the house and wash the dishes, and these little black devils be free? No heart can bear it. Such is the difference between us and them, that it is a greater injury to us to be deprived of their labor than it is to them to be deprived of their liberty and everything else. This wicked convention will have to answer another day for the great injury they have done us in doing justice to them. Emancipation on some plan as above hinted would probably in many instances be a real advantage to children in point of wealth. Parents would educate them in such a manner and place them in such circumstances as would be more to their interest in possessing such unproductive estates as slaves are found to be. The children would imbibe a noble independent spirit, learn a habit of managing business and helping themselves. They would learn to scorn the mean and beggarly way of living at the expense of others, living in splendor on plunder of the innocent. Where estates were wisely managed, children would not find their fortunes diminished. They would not be mocked with nominal but possess great wealth. Wealth that would not merely feed their vanity but fill their coffers. The children of the slaves, instead of being ruined for want of education, would be so brought up as to become useful citizens. The country would improve by their industry. Manufacturers would flourish, and in time of war they would not be the terror but the strength and defense of the state. It may be farther objected than to attempt, even in this gradual way, the annihilation of slavery in this country, where so many are deeply interested, might so sensibly touch the interests of some unreasonable men as probably to stir up great confusion and endanger the tranquility of our infant state. Though I doubt not but some men of narrow minds, of the influence of prejudice and covet might be made uneasy and disposed of clamor, yet I apprehend but little danger of ill effects. The major would be so agreeable to the honest dictates of conscience, the growing sentiments of the country, and of many even of the slaveholders themselves, that any opposition might It would not be supported, be wise, hastening event, so much dread. If the growing opinion on lawful slavery continue to grow, holding men in the state should be impracticable. There's no cause exiting sufficient to produce the cause. The slavery of Negroes began in inequity. A curse has attended and a curse will follow it. National vices will be punished with national calamities. Let us avoid these vices, that we may avoid the punishment which they deserve, and endeavor so to act as to secure the appropriation and smiles of heaven. Holding men in slavery is the national vice of Virginia, and while a part of that state, we are partakers of the guilt. As a separate state, we are just now come to the birth, and it depends upon our free choice whether we shall be born in this sin or innocent of it. We now have in our power to adopt our national crime or bear a national testimony against it. I hope we vote against it.